Hey everybody, this is not the video I was expecting to be the next upload on the channel, but more on that at the end of the video. I'll give you an update on what's going on with the channel. That said, this is Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans, the original game in the Warcraft series, the very first real-time strategy game that Blizzard Entertainment released, and let's face it, the vast majority of people out there have never played the original Warcraft. If they have played any of the strategy games in the series at all, they've probably played Warcraft 3. If they're older, they've probably played Warcraft 2, but probably not Warcraft 1. It was certainly a commercial and critical success back when it originally released, but sales for it were never all that huge. It wasn't until Warcraft 2 that sales really started to pick up for the series, and then of course Warcraft 3 came out a few years after StarCraft did, so by that point Blizzard's name was firmly seated in the upper echelons of real-time strategy game development. And that brings me to something that needs to be clarified, I think, before we go any further here. First things first, I have absolutely no nostalgia for this game whatsoever. I never played it back in the day, and the very first Warcraft game I ever actually played was the demo of Warcraft 3, and I really wasn't all that impressed with it, although to be fair, all of Blizzard's games have been ludicrously overhyped, so every single time I've gone into one of them I've been like, wow, this is remarkably underwhelming. Now I should also mention that I never played World of Warcraft and still have not played World of Warcraft, and I absolutely never will play World of Warcraft. I have absolutely no interest in it, and I have basically no interest in MMOs whatsoever. So I really don't have any kind of emotional attachment to the Warcraft franchise at all. What I do have an emotional attachment to, however, is StarCraft. And it's not a good emotional attachment. And that attachment is that I absolutely hate StarCraft. And I don't mean that in the sense that people like to throw around of, haha, DW hates everything, he just doesn't like any games, blah blah blah, that's obviously ludicrous. No, I legitimately hate StarCraft. I hate it so much, I want it erased from existence. And it's not because it's a bad game, it's actually not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. It's what it did to the real-time strategy game genre. And if you want more information on that, go watch my StarCraft video. I'll throw a link to it here in the cards that pop up on the screen and you can take a look at it. But the clarification I need to make with this is that you may be tempted to think that because I absolutely despise StarCraft, I would also despise Warcraft, and that is simply not the case. That doesn't necessarily mean that I like or love the Warcraft games, it just means I don't hate them. And with that clarification, so that you avoid succumbing to the cliche of haha, DW hates everything, or the fallacy of thinking that because I hate StarCraft, I would also hate Warcraft, I will now fulfill my channel's cliche in saying that I really don't like Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans, and I highly recommend against you playing it. However, before you start going, oh, of course he hates it, I don't hate it, it's just really primitive. It's the same problem I have when playing Dune 2, The Battle for Arrakis, also known as Dune 2, The Building of a Dynasty. It was so early in the development of the traditional base-building real-time strategy game that a lot of really simple things that would be ironed out even within the following year's original Command & Conquer were not the case in Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans. The first problem here is the big thing that makes me really not like playing Dune 2, which is the controls. This game released prior to the popularization of dynamic mouse controls. By that I mean that when you select a unit, you can say right-click somewhere in the environment to have them move to that place, you right-click on an enemy unit to have them attack that unit, you right-click on a building to have them garrison in it, or to start generating resources at that building, whatever the case may be. Instead, you had to select the unit, and then you select the button in the interface, or you use the hotkey on your keyboard to activate the command you want to issue to that unit, and then you can click somewhere in the environment or on an enemy unit or whatever the case may be in order for them to actually do what you want them to do. So for example, if you want to move a unit around, you select the unit, then you click on the move button in the interface, or you press the M key on your keyboard, and then you click somewhere in the environment that you want them to move to. If you want them to attack an enemy, you can't simply click on the move key and then click on the unit, because they'll just wander up to the enemy and won't start attacking it until that enemy has already started whacking them. Instead, you have to press A for attack on the keyboard, or click on the attack button in the interface, and then click on the unit. And even if you have issued the correct commands for this, unfortunately the unit AI and pathfinding is absolutely atrocious. Like I said, they will not not attack things unless they are attacked themselves, and that even includes letting enemies just walk right past them and just continuing to stand there. And like with a lot of real-time strategy games, even up to this day, but especially back then, the unit pathfinding was just absolutely terrible in the original Warcraft. Units will just get stuck on things constantly, they'll just wander off in directions you really didn't intend for them to go because they're taking a weird roundabout way of trying to get to where you're telling them to go, and it just ends up being a very frustrating process. This is all very clunky to begin with, and it's made much worse when you're trying to command larger groups of units, because your maximum group command size is 4 units, so you can select up to 4 units to actually move around and have them attack and things like that. Again though, only being able to select up to 4 units at a time. But funnily enough, as horrible as that probably sounds to anybody who's played a real-time strategy game released in the past 30 years, Warcraft is actually better than Dune 2 in that regard. You see, Dune 2 didn't have unit groups. You couldn't select more than a single unit at a time. The original Warcraft's controls are clunky, don't get me wrong, but you can at least command groups of units in it. You couldn't in Dune 2, so that's already a step up over that previous game. And they even go a bit further than that, because the 2 methods you have for selecting multiple units are either holding shift and then clicking on each individual unit that you want in the group, or holding control and then clicking and dragging to select units in a box that you create from that click and drag effect. Yeah, as far as I'm aware, this is the first game in the real-time strategy genre to feature drag and select at all. And that's something that would go on to become completely standard in every real-time strategy game released after this. That said, because of the other limitations in place, it only helps so much, and when you combine that with the actual gameplay mechanics of Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans, there's just not a whole lot to really be able to sink your teeth into. Both factions, the Orcs and the Humans, play nearly identically to one another. They have some very, very slight differences with the magical units that you'll unlock later on in the campaign, and of course that you'll have in the skirmish mode, but for the most part, they play effectively identically to one another, and so there's really no variety between playing Orcs versus playing Humans. It's mainly just a matter of cosmetics. They do at least look very different from one another, but functionally they basically play the same. And that even extends to the campaigns, which are basically just mirror images of one another with some very, very slight differences between some of the missions. Now, that said, this was one of the earliest real-time strategy games, if not the earliest, to feature varied mission objectives, and by that I mean the objective for every single mission is not simply wipe out all of the enemy on the map. You might have an economic goal, you might have a specific target that you need to eliminate rather than just wiping out all of the enemy's forces. Now of course the vast majority of the missions are still simply wipe out all of the enemy on the map, but having any kind of variety to the objectives at all other than simply wipe out all the enemies on the map was actually an innovation at the time, and it would go on to influence basically every single real-time strategy game that released after it. And there were other aspects of the game's design that would influence later RTSs. For example, the entire economy system of Warcraft is more or less what would become the template for the genre as a whole. Sure, you had some that ascribed more to what Dune 2 and Command & Conquer achieved, where they had a single resource, you had resource nodes on the map, you sent your gatherer out to collect all that and bring it back automatically. But in Warcraft, you have specific dedicated economy units. In the case of the Humans, it's the peasants, and in the case of Orcs, it's the peons, and they can gather lumber and gather gold in the mines and bring that back to base, but they can also build structures. And for the base building style of real-time strategy game at least, that would become the much more common way of handling the economy. You would have a dedicated builder type unit that would actually build your structures. Maybe you would have a dedicated gatherer unit, or maybe it would be folded into the same role as the builder unit, and they would just have to go out to the resource nodes on the map and gather those resources and bring them back to base. Of course, the original Warcraft didn't exactly have all of that quite ironed out yet. Sure, the actual resource gathering part is simple and straightforward, and it still works fine, but the actual base building aspect of it is still rather primitive, and more importantly, gets very tedious. Because in order to build any structures in this game, they need to be located next to a cobblestone road, and you have to build those cobblestone roads out one tile at a time, and they cost 50 gold per tile. In that regard, it's actually pretty similar to the way Dune 2 handled the base building, where you had to build concrete pads to actually build the structures on. It's just that in the case of Warcraft, they opted for adjacent to roads instead, and that's something that would not return for any of the other games in the series, for pretty obvious reasons. Like I said, it makes the actual base building aspect very tedious, and there's really no strategic or even difficulty benefit to having it in the game, so they axed it for later entries. But despite all this, the foundations are still there. You can look at this game and see exactly where not only later entries in the Warcraft series would get a lot of their ideas and mechanics from, but where real-time strategy games as a whole would get a lot of their ideas and mechanics from. It was certainly a game that was incredibly influential on the RTS genre's development, but when you try to go back and play it, it's just a miserable experience to actually try and play it, at least in its original version. Now, I can't comment too much on the remaster because I don't have it and haven't played it, but from what I've seen, they have made pretty significant improvements to the interface and controls with that at the very least, so it is a much more eminently playable game than the original version is. You don't have to do the constant clicking in the interface or pressing the hotkey. Instead, it controls way more similarly to a modern real-time strategy game where you just select your unit and then you right-click on what you want them to do. And they also let you select considerably more units than the original game. Again, the original game only let you select up to 4 at a time, and the remaster triples that, so that is a significant improvement in terms of general playability. It's just that you're still dealing with the original Warcraft, and there's not a whole lot going on with it. I mean, after all, both sides play basically identically to one another. The two campaigns are basically just mirror images of one another, so there's almost no variety in terms of mechanics or the storyline or anything like that. In fact, speaking of the story, there basically isn't one. It's just the orcs and the humans are at war, and that's all you really need to know. And if you were expecting much more detailed story like you get in, say, Warcraft 3, you're just not gonna find it here. That wasn't something that happened until, well, Warcraft 3. So if you're a fan of the series, you can't even really go back to this one in order to get all the lore. You're just dealing with a almost purely mechanical game that was so early in the development of the real-time strategy genre as we know it today that it's borderline impossible to really go back to unless you have nostalgia to blunt the impact of it, or you are really into the history of video games and you absolutely must play this game and you know you can put up with all of its shortcomings. And both of those groups are going to be a very small number of people, so for the vast majority of folks out there, I really cannot recommend going back and playing the original Warcraft Orcs and Humans, even if you've got the remaster, unless you're absolutely sure you can put up with that near-total lack of variety and how primitive the mechanics are. But what about if you're just looking to get into the Warcraft strategy games in particular, because obviously World of Warcraft's a completely different genre? Well, that's where things get tricky. It's definitely not the original Warcraft. I would not recommend that unless, again, you fall into one of the previous categories I've mentioned. But if you're just looking to get into the Warcraft franchise, and at least as far as the strategy games are concerned, then depending on your previous experience, you've got two options. If you're relatively new to real-time strategy games, or outright very new to real-time strategy games, then it would be Warcraft 3. It is the most readily accessible of the bunch, even though it does play very, very differently from both of its predecessors. But if you're a hardened veteran of real-time strategy games, then you have the option of Warcraft 2. Why do I say only for hardened veterans of real-time strategy games? Well, to put it simply, it's because Warcraft 2 starts out deceptively easy and then starts ramping up the difficulty pretty dramatically to the point where it becomes pretty punishing by the end of the main campaign, and the Beyond the Dark Portal expansion becomes downright brutal. It is really not the kind of game that the average casual real-time strategy player is going to be able to just pick up and play and be able to enjoy from start to finish. They're going to hit a certain wall in the difficulty and be like, you know what, no, I'm done with this. This is just a mess. Whereas those of us who've been playing real-time strategy games for a long time, or absolute diehards of the genre, are going to be able to put up with that a lot more. But of course, Warcraft 2 and 3 are subjects for different videos entirely, so I don't want to go too deep into those right now. Just understand that the original Warcraft is really not a very good entry point for the series, and I really don't recommend going back and playing it again unless you have intense nostalgia for the game, or if you are just one of those gaming historians who can put up with all the shortcomings at least long enough to get what you need to get out of it. Now, all that said, if you do want to give this game a try for yourself, ordinarily I would recommend the version that I've actually been showing you throughout this video, which is the GOG version. I do have an original copy of Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans, but it's just so much more convenient to use the GOG version. But that got removed shortly before the 2 remasters of Warcraft 1 and 2 got announced, because of course it did. So that means getting the original version of Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans means you kind of have to go out of your way a bit. It's definitely not hard to find used copies of the original Warcraft, although I know the price has gone up a fair bit over the past several years because the prices for any retro games have gone up over the past several years. But if you don't care about any kind of collector grade items, like not complete in box or anything like that, then you can pick it up for about $10 or less. And thankfully it doesn't take much to run the original version because it was a DOS game, so you can just run it in DOSBox and it works fine. That said, if you don't want to go through all that, then the remaster is available on Battle.net. I'll go ahead and throw a link to that in the description box if you want to go that route. But again, I really wouldn't recommend the original Warcraft, whether you're playing the original version or remaster, unless you fit the criteria I've mentioned previously. Which is of course a shame, because this game was hugely influential. It's just that it has aged very poorly, and unlike some other games of the mid-90s, it is very difficult to go back to, even if you do have the luxury of a few convenience features here and there. But overall, I would just say that the original Warcraft is a game better left in history as far as the actual playing experience goes, even though we should definitely always remember it for its contributions. Thank you all very much for watching, and now to continue the update that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. I'm still working on the Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 review, but they just released a DLC for it a couple weeks ago, and between that, being busy in general, and unfortunately not feeling well for most of the past week, unfortunately that video is going to be delayed a bit more. It's still going to be the next main review, so stay tuned for that if you're interested, but there's a very good chance that between now and then there will be either a DW Plays or maybe another MTO or two. It's hard to say, it just depends on when I get that DLC finished up and when I can actually get the video put together. It also doesn't help that I have to go back and review some of the gameplay changes they've made, because they have actually put out some fairly significant updates for the game, so it feels like it's basically an ongoing saga at this point, and I really appreciate your patience on it. And honestly, I'm at the point where I'm wondering if I should just go ahead and wait until the second DLC is out. It's called The Flower and the Flame, if I remember correctly. That's scheduled for either Q2 or Q3 of this year, so I'd really appreciate your feedback on that. I think I'm going to actually go ahead and throw up a poll on the main channel. That way I can get some general feedback on whether it would be better to just go ahead and shelf the project until all the DLC's out and they've gotten pretty much all the updates that it's going to have done, so that I can get it all comprehensively reviewed, as opposed to getting the review of the base game and DLC 1 done, but then DLC 2 being just off in the ether somewhere. I don't know. It's a whole mess, and at this point it actually feels like that video is holding this channel back, so again, I'd really appreciate your feedback, and I appreciate your patience while I've been trying to get that one done. There's a fair few other things too, but for whatever reason, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 has just been a thorn in my side this whole time. So again, really appreciate your patience on that, and I would love any kind of feedback you have for me on that one. Now then, with all of that said, I think that's about all I need to cover for the updates on the channel at the moment. If you have any other questions, feel free to let me know. Q&A submissions are still open because I'm still not through all the request month content yet. I will say, after the results of the poll, if the response is definitively that I should just go ahead and wait until the second DLC's out to get that review done, then I will go ahead and move the timetable up to whenever I get the video that was planned for after Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 for request month done. So Q&A submissions will still be open until then for those of you who are interested in submitting a question for the Q&A. So if you have one of those questions, go ahead and submit it. And that covers everything I can think of for the moment, so thank you all again for watching and staying with me to the end of the video, and I will see you all in later videos.